Looks like we are live once again. Welcome back to another episode of The Future of Education. Today, we're going to be discussing loosely the idea of beginning with the end in mind with students, with education, and with kind of where we want to go as a society. My guests today are Debbie Elder, Jackie Gold, as usual, Dr. Yvette Ancra. I hope I pronounced your last name right.
Ancra.
Ancra. I was close. And Thomas Brennan. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
You guys can all say welcome now.
Welcome. Thank you.
Or thank you. You can all say thank you now.
Thanks for having me.
I'm just going to quickly do a little bit of sharing out. Give me just 1 second. But, let's see. Here we are. I really do need to find a more elegant way to do this sharing out so that I don't have to look down for the first 30 seconds of discussion. Okay, there we are. So again, as I mentioned, the general topic today is beginning with the end in mind. And this was inspired by something that Debbie talks about a lot. When it came to your decisions to raise your daughters and educate your daughters, you had the question, who do I want walking out the door at 18? Now, it's funny to me because it's one of those things that when you say it, it sounds so obvious. Of course, right? Why wouldn't we all think that? And yet, I think there's ample evidence to prove or to at least strongly infer that that by and large, we sort of just outsource the responsibility for a kid's education to whomever. And in more cases than not, that's the public education system. Mm-hmm. Tell me how you first came to this idea. What was the impetus to first sort of get lucid about this?
Was twofold, Manny. So I made the decision when my daughters were quite young to pull them out of public school and homeschool them due to the lack of efficiency of the public school. And that was really the main reason. And in doing that, I had to really look at how I was going to do something I'd never done before. My background is criminology, not education. And so I had to think about what did I want walking out my door at 18. That was also prompted by a lot of parenting classes that I was given. And what I was seeing was people were simply reacting to their children. They weren't responding. And when I delved a little deeper into why that was happening, it's because they didn't have a plan. And I would say to them, you would never walk into a meeting without an agenda, yet you wake up every day as a parent and it's a brand new day. And that's not effective. It's not effective in education. It's not effective in anything. And so for me, that sort of guide of thinking about what do I want at the end really kept me focused. And it's that idea of once the big questions are answered, the little ones are really easy. Does it get me to where I want to go or not?
Right.
And so it made parenting very easy. It made educating my daughters and then future students super easy. So it worked for me.
So one of the big things that I think can happen, especially if we're not approaching, the decisions around our kids with some sort of a clear answer to that question in mind, is the sort of phenomenon of how the school, the education system, for better or for worse, it has a huge sort of indirect impact on the stories, the identity, and the beliefs that our kids form about themselves. Yvette, I'd like to get your take on what can we do to set our kids up so that they have good stories, good self-image, good I guess like stories and identity, right? Because they're away from parents more than they're with parents in today's society. And so we don't necessarily have the influence over them that we maybe would like. So what can we do to help them have strong identities, especially as they maybe go through the public school system?
I mean, I'm a parent of an 8-year-old, so I'm going to talk as a parent and then also from my work as well. So that the being curious and talking to them, it's important every day to connect with that child, to have a conversation and find out what's going on for them and listen to how they speak and listen to how they engage. So there's so many people, the adults I work with, who find that at one point in their life, someone told them they wasn't good at something. Right. And they hold on to that and they keep that story, and that story maintains. So it's a case of encouraging them to explore, to do things, to grow, insist on a growth mindset. I'm one of those parents that have no problem watching my kid fall off that bike, because I want to see him get back up again. I want to see him build that resilience within himself and learn from it. And if he can't get something right, it's not the bit that I'm worried about. It's how do you manage that? It's not the right bit. It's what's your process? How are you going to learn to understand how to move through that? And even if it's something that you get worried about, it's like, okay, what can we do? How can we help you to manage this and to sort of instill this ability to do that himself? It's building that resilience, growth, and being scared of the failure.
I like this. I like this idea of building resilience versus, creating an environment where they feel like they have to get it right. Do I track that right? Is that what you're saying?
That's it. It's not, it's the journey, not always the result. You obviously will correct them on their path, but it's, if you didn't get this right, how do you check? How do you find your answers? I've had this today with virtual school, with the maths problem. It's like, you can actually check your own answer, can't you? How are you going to do this? And, having the meltdown, dealing with the meltdown, and then seeing him actually work out how to actually forge forward. And that's to me the bit, because I'm not always going to be there. The teacher's not always going to be there. He has to be able to do that for himself.
It's so hard to watch our children go through the hard part of that process.
Mm-hmm.
Tom, what are your thoughts on sort of preparing ourselves for that process so that we can let the child or children fail, scrape their knees, get back up, dust themselves off, do it again? What's your 2 cents on that?
I think it starts early with communication, talking to the children, but encouraging them to talk to you.
Yeah.
Teach them that asking the who, what, when, how, and why is perfectly acceptable. Yeah. A lot of parents will say, because I said so. I always provided an explanation when my kids asked me why. Mm-hmm. Well, because that way they're going to start developing their own thought processes. So when they're out in the world, even in as young as preschool or first grade, when something goes off track, they're not afraid to say, why? Help me understand why this went wrong. And not only were they comfortable asking me that, but their own support network, which included their aunts and uncles and grandparents, but then their peers at school and their teachers. And if they're comfortable talking to a parent, because oftentimes a parent can be the most intimidating person in a child's life. So if they're comfortable talking to me about anything, they will be that much more confident and at ease asking other people intelligent questions and being able to figure out what the right answer is. And then when they realize there's a failure of result, but who cares? It's, did you follow the process? I think to the good doctor's point, follow the process, ask the questions, and go back and fix the process if necessary. But it comes down from building confidence through communication. And that's, Jackie and I have talked about that many times. And a lot of times kids are not given the tools to learn how to be confident or the permission to ask questions.
So the theme here that I'm seeing is the importance of communication in this whole process.
I believe so.
Yeah.
How do we rise above our own biases, our own styles, our own frustration, our own overwhelm, in order to show up in this way style of communication with our children? Jackie.
I'd say actually it's quite a natural way of being at home. You know, if you have conversations with, I'm not saying every parent does, or every parent is given the opportunity to, because some parents have to, especially in these times, work more than one job in order to achieve the results they want to achieve.
Right.
But you can always encourage your child, because if I'm busy at the moment, I'll say, okay, I promise you in the next half an hour, we can sit down and go through that. You know, we had it this morning when I've had back-to-back meetings all day, but I put aside a time and explained to him how his school was going. He's an 8-year-old as well, Yvette. Explained to him how his school had planned to reopen next month, but it won't include his year group, and that his year group will probably not be coming back until July, maybe, you know, and how does he feel about that? And his response was, well, I wouldn't feel comfortable in that environment anyway. So, you know, I'm quite happy to not go back until September, which, you know, it's because the conversation is encouraged that he felt confident enough to say that to me, knowing that I wouldn't get upset with him. So my response was, okay, that works for me. As long as you know that if you feel your feeling changes at any time, we can have another conversation. But at the moment, just know that nothing's happening in June. So we just continue with our homework. However, at school, that confidence is stamped on to a large degree, where you have kids that ask questions that you don't necessarily want them to ask. It becomes a problem.
Now, are we talking about in social dynamics, or are we talking about teachers stomping out the curiosity of the children that they're learning at home?
I'm saying at home, if you encourage the conversation, the conversation can happen quite naturally.
Yeah.
Okay. If you're a busy parent, if you can find that time to say, right, this is our time, let's have that conversation, then you can build that confidence necessary to be curious about outcomes, to be curious about where you're being placed. However, the difficulty arises because, as you quite rightly said, they're at school more than they're at home.
Right.
So the influences of school tend to stamp to a certain degree on the influences at home. With being shut down at school, they feel they have to shut down in completeness, you know. So they can't. My daughter's always been asked by her friends, why do you talk to your mom so much? She talks to me about absolutely everything.
Yeah.
Even some of those that you go, oh yeah.
And I think that's what we sign on for if we start down this path, you know, is one of the things that became a challenge for me. Two things that became a challenge for me were, and it's a little embarrassing to admit this, but I think it contributes to the conversation and hopefully to those listening. It got exhausting to have an intellectually really, really advanced kid who wanted to know the answer to everything all the time, right? There can be a sense of creating a little adorable, brilliant Frankenstein's monster. You know what I mean? We're all sort of nodding a little bit here, where you say, I'm committing to this track where I will give my child the answers to everything and I will stoke their natural wonder. And then right about the time they're 12 and you're just like exhausted, you haven't and they have been raised to believe, and rightfully so, that they have a right to answers and they have a right to asking questions. So that was one of the things that admittedly became a challenge for me. And then there are larger concerns as well. One of the things that I'd like to know how we can address is the influence of school and peers. And this is a little bit like, I try to stay objective on these, but my own experience with myself and my son in public school was so bad I mean, it was just wall to wall garbage. You know, there were no bright spots that I can think of, and that is what it is. But what I saw was that I didn't have enough influence at a certain point to counteract the influence of the school and the teachers. So, Debbie, I'm curious as to your thoughts and solutions for that kind of dynamic.
So I'm going to back up a little bit, Manny, and I will come to that. I will give you my answer. I think before communication, there needs to be clarity on the part of the adult, going back to our topic today, right? And I think that's one of the most difficult things, is to think that far ahead. I know even with my teachers, I have them outline their year. What's your year going to look like? Write it down, write a letter to yourself, and I'm going to hold it and give it to you at the end of the school year. But I want you to think, I want you to put it out there. I want you to set your intentions. I want you to be very clear. So clarity comes first, then communication. Yeah. One of the things that we've done on our campus that has really helped our parents with communication, not all are as gifted as Jackie in having that relationship. And so we have sent home every week, here's what we're going to be covering in the classes. Here's some questions to ask your child about specifically, so you can be involved in what we're doing. And especially with young children, if you give them a question, if you can pry their conversation, they will be able to talk to you. If you just ask them, you know, how was your day? They're like, oh my gosh, too many things happened today. I can't even answer that question. It's too big. But if you give them a little bit and you also have some background as to what's happening in the classroom, you can help to control a little bit of that communication, I think, to benefit the child. The other thing, you know, we talking about having interaction with our children. My husband and I raised a home where we wanted our daughters to negotiate. Why do you want to go to that party? Tell me why. I don't want to say no. We're Canadian, we played a lot of cards, so we had a trump card. The trump card beat everything. So I promised my no, which was my trump card, to use it without explanation very, very rarely. And I, you know, like I had one non-negotiable was my kids were not going to middle school. The middle school we were zoned to was not appropriate. They weren't going. But everything else was open, and we discussed it and we talked about it, because if we don't give them the opportunity to develop that ability to discuss, to back what they believe in and to ask the questions, where are they going to get it? And so with, you know, with the seeds that we plant with our young children allow us to reap what we're going to sow later. And I think coming again back to this clarity of what you want at the end of the day, at the end of the year, at the end of their child's 18 years of life, really allows you to sow the seeds to keep that conversation going throughout those difficult teenage years. I don't believe, and I lived and came out the other side of it, teenagers don't have to be nasty to their parents, right? Mine were not, and they were with me all the time, both my daughters. But that was something that I had determined was not going to happen in my household. And I had a conversation with a woman who also homeschooled 2 daughters. And she said, oh, well, it's biologically, they have to separate from you. And I said, I agree, they're not going to live with me until they're 50, but it doesn't have to be that separation, right? There is I want them to be independent. My daughters are very independent, but I also wanted them to not sever a relationship to attain that end, if that makes sense. So I think the other thing that I offer parents is family meetings. I think are very valuable, where the children and the adults have an equal vote, and you discuss things, maybe vacations or household chores or whatever. My one caveat to parents is don't bring anything to the agenda of a family meeting you're not willing to let your child have an equal vote. So you have to be smarter than the children. But it teaches a very good process, and it teaches them how to have a voice and how to run a meeting and all those other pieces. And all of that allows them to have the confidence. If you have an equal vote in a family meeting with your adult parents, that's pretty confidence building when you get into a peer group situation and you're like, well, you're no better than me, right? I don't care if you're in 8th grade and I'm in 5th grade, I matter. And this is why I matter. And I think building all of those seeds of image and really being aware, I don't believe, and I'm sure Dr. Yvette can help me with this, children are going to have limiting beliefs. We're going to say something that they in their minds are going to misconstrue innocently. And all of a sudden take that as meaning something about them. That's just what happens. As adults, we need to identify those limiting beliefs and then work through them. But to think that we can raise a child without any of them, Well, Dr. Yvette, I'd love to hear what you say. I don't know how to do that. And it would be, because I suggest to my teachers every morning, you are powerful individuals in the lives of these children. Mark your words. Be careful. But even in that, a child wakes up the wrong side of the bed. You say one thing, they perceive it some other way. Bam, limiting belief, inserted, right? So
Yeah.
Exactly, and that's true. There's not much you can do to change it, but also being aware of your words, being aware of the meaning, and also being aware of how you can help them move through it is what you can do. That's what you can do, and help them be aware of their own perception. So that's just me coming back with that.
And to question that perception, right? To have the ability to have that self-awareness to go, but is that really true about me? No, that's not.
Exactly.
Right?
And that's truly important, because a lot of adults never learn that.
Yeah, that's true. I like the idea of family meetings, and I like having the overarching, don't bring any agenda to a family meeting that you're not willing to give your kids a full vote on. I really think like that is it seems like a very powerful tool. From the perspective of communication, what else can we be doing, Tom, to engender that sense of, I guess it's really confidence, right? It's confidence confidence at a foundational level in the kids. If we know that our outcome that we want is for them not to be sort of caught in the undertow of social pressure and maybe perhaps teachers who are less than perfect, that maybe we'll get into a little bit later. But what else can we do in addition to this family meeting idea to instill this kind of sort of character?
Honestly, I think it starts teaching them the difference between right and wrong, because that way they're going to have a sense of, at least for your family and your family norms, what you vision as right and what is wrong.
Okay.
So that as decisions and opportunities come up, they know, is this a path I really should be traveling down? Yeah. Or if they start asking questions and they start hearing answers, they can say, wait a minute, I hear your answer, but in my core integrity, or what I believe to be the truth, that is not fitting within my discipline. So I need to go a different way. So it kind of goes back to what you said earlier. How do you set up your kids to succeed? Where do you want to be? You want your kids to know the difference between right and wrong. So if I gave you a list of 8 or 10 adjectives that I wanted to describe my kids when they walked out of the house at 18, one of them would be honest, decent people who, if they make a mistake, it will be aired on the side of caution or on the side of humanity versus just a careless expenditure of time. Yeah. So it goes back to teaching the truth and honesty behind everything, not to discourage them from asking the questions. Okay, Dad, you think that's the truth. Why do you think that's the truth? And encourage the conversation so they can also learn to do their own critical thinking and learn their own truth. But you do have to, I think, establish a right and wrong mechanism.
Yeah. Okay.
That makes sense.
So are we talking here more about a philosophical right and wrong, or a sort of a living document, kind of a family set of values?
Probably a little bit of both. I mean, from a family value standpoint, Debbie said that she worked with the kids and her teachers, and they have a set of, this is what we want.
Right.
Well, because of the backgrounds Debbie and I have, our values may be a little different. What I prioritize, I would imagine our list would be very similar, but what she has listed as number one, maybe my number two. Sure. So it has to start with your family values. What's important to you and your values. And that way, when your kid is 18 and 20, 25, and 30, and they start having their own families, they are going to modify their values in the order that they're important to them based on their experiences. So I think family values is paramount. And then the simple rights and wrong is follow law, don't follow law. Do you trespass, or do you go swimming where it says don't swimming? And so it's a combination of both, I think, Manny. Okay.
All right.
A family mission statement is a great exercise to go through to help get clear on values and what your vision is for your family. So there's tools. I know I have tools that I use with my clients to enable them to walk through that process. So, and it just gives it some framework.
Sure. Here's what here's what I'm on a personal level really taking from this conversation and really liking. And anyone who knows me knows that I sort of, in terms of how to live and how to be a good human, Stephen Covey is my teacher above all. He's the one above everyone else. I just see the DNA of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People just shows up more and more the deeper I go into sort of, what are the pillars that make a good life? And it's so interesting. And I say that because that's what we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. This is exactly the kind of stuff that he outlined in all the parts of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where he talks about family rearing, family meetings, family mission statement, this stuff, giving them not only the sort of foundations of right and wrong and ethics, but allowing them to make their own decisions from a place of this integrity, character, all these sort of things. But now, Jackie, can we, and if so, how can we collaborate with teachers or important people, influential people within school to sort of make sure that when we hand our kids off at 8:30 or whatever, they're not getting just a fully, different set of ideas sort of downloaded in them?
In the teachers or in the child?
In the child, because of the teachers.
In the child, I always make it very clear with any teacher that I've had dealings with my daughter when she was at school and with my son now, that I'm an open book. So if you're introducing something new, then please let me know what it is, because if I hear a story which I'm slightly uncomfortable with, I'm very inclined to get back to you with my queries. So it's easier to just have the conversation with me, and I make a point of talking to senior management every morning that I take him, and seeing if there's anything new I should know about. That conversation, this is why in JG Educate, we have that partnership going, where equal stakeholders, both working towards the same aim, and that is building the child. So therefore, the conversation has to be there. You can't just drop off your child, have that download, and then know that when that child comes home, they could have had the fullest day possible. And in fact, you'll know exactly what I say when you say, what happened at school? And they say nothing.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the specifics of what that, in JG Educate, what that mechanism of collaboration with the parents looks like. That's what I'm really curious is like step by step, what do we do so that I would wager a guess that teachers will respond differently, knowing they are going to be talking to the parent more than they will for a parent that they don't think they're going to be talking to more.
Right, there's a 2-step process that we go through in the beginning before a student is even allowed to work with us, in which we have one conversation with the parents to start with to see, on a family level, if there's a goodness of fit. But there's no assumption that what the parent's saying is what the child wants.
Right.
So the parent might say, right, I'm ready for him to come to you. Is he ready to come to me? You see, because ultimately it's not about the parent so much, it's about the child, right? So I need to speak to the child in a second conversation, in which you try to gauge how comfortably they talk about their own aspirations, and how comfortably that is taken on with the parents, because that's a 3-way conversation. And decisions are made on that basis. Because if that child if there's visible awkwardness with speaking against the parent, then you've got a mismatch there, which might or might not be addressed. It's one that doesn't come up very much in the state school system, because that's not what they're looking for. They're looking for whether this child can come into the school or not.
You mean over here in the US?
No, when I say state school, that's what we call public schools.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Okay. So they can get into a school without you loving the parents. And there's an ongoing joke that Parents' Evening will tell you exactly what the problem with the child is when you meet the parents, you know. So in order to avoid all of that, we meet our parents up front and establish the communication straight away. We also believe in reporting any difficulties straight away, having that conversation again straight away, because needs change, feelings change. You know, it's about supporting the child. The child has to know that the two biggest influences in their life are actually working towards the common good, which is how they walk out the door at the end of their educational career.
Yeah.
If they're not comfortable on one side, it tends to topple over slightly.
Sure. So, Yvette, your degree is in sociology, and you mentioned before we went live that a story is a big part of what you are sort of your academic study. Tell me, from that perspective, what is the power of story in the development and the self-identity of a child?
It's huge. It's huge. So just to give you a little bit more about the PhD, I looked at second generation Ghanaians. So it was children born of Ghanaian migrants in the UK. So for that particular cohort, they had an education narrative. A lot of them were told, you know, education. That is what's important. That's what's going to get you through. That's what's going to help you succeed. So that narrative of you must get an education was really critical to who they were and part of their identity. So amongst that group, some of them went to private schools, some of them went to state school, our public schools, and they had different experiences. And just to give you one of the stories, one of them had a horrible time in his private school. He was having issues with teachers, with racism, with lots of issues, and absolutely hated his time there. However, he never told his parents until he was a parent himself how miserable he was at school, because of the importance to them that he got this what they deemed as a good education in that environment.
Right.
So he dealt with various different things, which we're going to talk about in the thesis. And he said, you know, I didn't sit down and talk to my father until he was a parent himself. And his father said, you should have spoken to me. But he didn't feel that he could.
Right.
So that was something, how that story of you should succeed, you must do well, whatever the environment is, made him feel as if he couldn't have any agency and discuss that. So it affects now how he parents. So he parents very differently. There's lots of dialogue, lots of communication, lots of openness, lots of, I'm going to be, you know, your teacher's best friend. I want to know what's going on in that school. So it's meant that they now have a completely different viewpoint. And similarly, the teachers, whether they love me or like me, I don't care, but I will talk to them regularly. I will email them. I will visit them. I will say hi in the playground. Right. I want them to know that I'm involved, and I want to be involved in everything to do with my child's education. And I also want them to know that my child is allowed to ask questions, because that's how I've raised him. So the expectation of that dialogue is, I want to see that happening. But that comes back to the story of, the same story of education is important, but it is not as important enough as the happiness of the next generation.
Absolutely.
So what are the contributing components then that create the story, or it's really more, it's more like a meta story, right? We don't just have one story inside of us that sort of shapes us, but it's a I think of it as like a weave of many stories. How do we as parents, and how do we as teachers, how do we as influencers of children make sure that the stories are beneficial? Like, what I guess I'm trying to ask, like, what do we do that creates the stories that the younger generations sort of evolve of themselves? How does it transfer? How does it translate? How does it get passed down?
I think it's the similar to what Debbie said about deciding what you want at the end. My goal, and similar to Tom, is to have a happy, well-rounded individual that's kind and all those kind of values, and who understands that, you know, taking part in their education is important. Yeah. However, understands that there's a journey, and that what they start doing may not be what they end doing. So it's kind of being open and sharing, age appropriately, to what that journey is. You know, I'm somebody who went on to do a PhD, but I didn't like school very much because I didn't like the structure of it at all. It didn't work for me. Didn't mean that I wasn't, I didn't get good grades, but I didn't enjoy the experience of it. So it's kind of understanding that, where you are may not be your ideal environment, but how can you make the best of it? What can you take from it? Allowing them to be a bit more, have some agency, I think, in their own relationship with that school, with the people that are there. And again, that asking questions, that being curious, that answering the why. I mean, my child started speaking at 18 months. We were once in the supermarket and it took 2 hours to do a shop because he asked me questions about absolutely everything. And the woman stopped me and said, "You must have the patience of a saint." I was like sitting there just doing deep breathing. But the point was, I said, it's my job to answer his questions.
Right.
That is my role as his parent.
Right.
So as you said, you set yourself up for that, but it's instilling that, embodying it, however hard it may be, and resisting that because I told you so answer.
So I guess I'm curious. I feel like the answer is going to be that embodying it is the main way that we really convey. Because one thing that I believe about children, and all of you are welcome to agree or disagree with this, I believed about children that they look at their parents as sort of like, to borrow a terminology from art. Their parents are both figure and ground. And what I mean by that is they look at what you do and what you say and who you are, but they look very, very closely at what you don't say, what you don't do, who you aren't. And they learn from all of it. And so I guess what I was asking is, like, for those of us that maybe this conversation is like, whoa, this sounds like I have to change a lot in order to raise a good kid, right? What do we need to be aware of in our own sort of interactions with our kids in order that we don't sort of surreptitiously give them a self-destructive story? Because many people of our generations know what that feels like, right? We were given stories indeliberately by parents who were not knowing, wow, maybe my kid's watching everything I say and do, and everything I don't say and don't do, and maybe they're absorbing it all, and maybe I'm their whole worldview right now. And so I assume there are roughly 2 generations represented here, overlapping. We were sort of thrown out into the world, most of us, with, I think it's safe to say, not a lot of deliberate strategy having gone into the raising of us. How am I doing, you guys? Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I would say deliberate strategy, get a degree, get a job, that was it, kind of thing.
Right. But what we're talking about here is deliberate strategies for like making good people, right? That's what we're talking about here. And so I think, well, let's Tom, get your take on this. What do you think the most important thing is in how we show up and interact to sort of influence that self-image story in a positive way?
I think as a parent, you have to be aware of who you are,
okay,
and how you communicate. Because you may not realize that you come off harsh, or you come off negative, or you come off critical when you don't mean to be. Yeah. I'll use myself as an example. I have been accused of being negative. And it took a long time to realize I'm actually not negative. But when people ask me a question, I critically answer it.
Yeah.
And as a parent, that's what I was doing. And it took me a while to figure out, wait a minute, the answer was correct. The delivery was not.
Yeah.
So I had to become aware of who I was and how I delivered my message.
Yeah.
To make sure that it was not the end result and the answer was going to be the same, but the delivery mechanism was going to be different.
So when you talk about communication, and let me say, by the way, I feel like I did the exact same thing with my son. It's something that is frankly painful for me to look back on, because in my heart and in my mind, I was trying my hardest to deliberately and conscientiously raise a good, perfect, well-adjusted, handsome, smart, successful young man, and in our case, some of his formative years were during the Great Recession, 2008 to 2012, and I was simply overwhelmed, as many of us were. I did not have the bandwidth to show up the way I wish I would have many times. I've since owned that with him, but this isn't about me. This is about understanding what you're saying. And so when you talk about communication being this foundational piece, are you saying that it's more than having good communication skills? Because now I'm hearing something about tone and I'm hearing something about delivery.
I tied that all into communication.
Okay.
Like, I can know all the fancy words.
Yeah.
But are the fancy words appropriate for a 5-year-old? Probably not.
Right.
So it's the message. Can you create a message that can be delivered with clarity that is that's age appropriate?
Yeah. What about
and that's a challenge.
What about, because you said something that really struck home with me and is what made me go on my little sort of exposition there about sounding frustrated when you don't mean to, or short when you don't mean to, like accidentally being, maybe impatient or brusque or whatever. It is my belief that those tiny little moments, split-second moments, were like hand grenades in my son's heart. I mean, really, like, I really think that to the extent that I could have done anything different, I think those are the places where I really dropped the ball and I sort of ambushed his trust. So I'm curious, we're used to talking to other adults, right? And I think we take for granted a certain amount of flexibility we have with things like forcefulness and tone. Anybody got any help for me on how we modify that to speak to someone? And I don't mean to get glad handy and sort of like self-righteous, but let's face it, when these children are little, they're innocent. And there's a certain way you have to engage with innocence, right? That you don't have to be so attentive to speaking to other grown-ups.
I think
go ahead.
In my circumstance,
yeah,
I got custody. I was a single parent, raised both of my kids when they were young. Got custody when they were 2.5 and 3.5, or 3 or 4, preschool and first grade, or preschool and kindergarten. So we had a rapport. I learned them and they learned me.
Yeah,
and we accepted that there were going to be days that I was not going to be on my A game. I accepted they were not going to be on days that they were not going to be on their A game. But every conversation I've had with them, and I still do when they're now 26 and 28, ends with an "I love you."
Yeah.
And believe it or not, showing that compassion and using those 3 words are a great elixir for the times that we do maybe deliver a message off key, or when we have our own missteps. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, if the kids go to bed knowing it wasn't a great day, but my dad or my mom, my aunt, my uncle still love me and they still have my back, it's all good. Yeah. And I think it does, from a story standpoint, add to my parents weren't perfect, but they always loved me. I always know they tried. And I've also freely admitted the mistakes I've made. Mm-hmm. I remember both of them. No.
As if it was yesterday.
Yeah. And my boys and I talk about that. And I think part of my responsibility as a parent to adults is to share what I would have done differently.
Yeah.
So that I am teeing them up to be better parents than I was.
Yeah.
So Debbie, I didn't mean to interrupt, and I'm sure you had something far more brilliant to say than that.
I think it comes down to building a culture, whether it's in your school or your family, that allows them to say, so I was walking through school one day and a 6-year-old came to me and said, Mrs. Elder, why are you so mad? And I said, oh, Chloe, I'm not mad. This is my thinking face. I'll try to fix it. I'm sorry. But the fact that, her first year on campus, she could ask the director, the principal, the head of school, what's up with you today? That is, it was a good reminder for me, because I do have that face when I'm thinking, and make sure I don't put it on. But I think that, that was a real testament to how well my teachers have set the culture for her to say that to me, and not be intimidated by the answer or think it was inappropriate. And being able to let your children say, I remember one time I got very upset, and I might have said a bad word, one or two. And my daughter came right over and put her arm around me and said, it's going to be okay. Can I help you? I'm like, and it was knowing that Mom doesn't always talk like this. This must be bad. I know I'm a kid, but maybe there's something I can do to help. And I think having that kind of culture, whether it's in your workplace, in your school, or in your home, can really help. And just to circle back to some of the things that Yvette and Jackie were saying earlier about advocating for your child and getting to know your teacher and being part of the success team for that individual is huge, because as teachers, we're human. And if you're not very nice to us as a parent, we can't help it. It transfers onto your child. As professional as we are, we're human.
Right.
So investing in that relationship and being willing to know your child well enough that when a teacher calls and says, this happened today, and none of, there's been a lot of memes. We've seen them, cartoons where, when I was being raised, the teacher was always right. My parents always took her side. And now it's going to complete 360, which is a problem. It's a problem in any school. And I know because I'm private, very much like Jackie, I can vet my parents before they come in. And if I don't like the parent, I'm not taking the child. Just not. And one of the questions I ask them is, what does success look like for your child? Because if you can't tell me what the target is I'm trying to hit, I'm never going to hit it. And I'm never going to be enough for your family. So you probably need to just keep on walking. So.
But to a large extent, when teaching in state school, what I found worked was with the children, it was not so much the knowledge that I could give them, but I used to teach them more that having a little bit of commitment to themselves, a little bit of courage to be different from their peers. And to be able to go against their peers, because there was nothing more annoying than the argument that starts from, he said something about my mom, because I'd say, okay, wait outside. And you'd find this child in a temper.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd say, if I ring your mom right now and tell her that her child's outside the classroom because he got annoyed because somebody said something, how would she feel? Come on now. He said my mom's fat. Is your mom fat? It's about what I wanted in them was to strike a balance and remember where you're going and why you take each step every day. You haven't come into the classroom to pass an hour. You've come into the classroom to take another step towards that end goal.
Yeah.
Do you see? You can't react to everything. You don't have to respond to everything.
I'll play devil's advocate for the kids here who get told by other kids that their mom is this and that. I've thrown more punches in my life to defend the honor of my mother than for all other reasons combined. So we're talking today about how we can consciously sort of set the question of who do we want walking out the door at 18. And some of the things that we've covered here, I think, are going to be very helpful for people, very useful. I'm going to summarize, but also sort of rephrase. There needs to be a mindfulness, like a curiosity in the first place, right? We don't want to sort of wake up every day as a new day and just sort of cruise through the day reacting to what happens, especially not with our kids. communication, and I really like that we got to the level where we were acknowledging that we're talking about communication down to the level of tone, and I would say body language too, because tone and body language are inexplicably linked or inextricably linked, and the effect that can have on our kids. We covered a little bit about some ideas and strategies like family meetings, and Debbie, the thing that you said was maybe my favorite thing of this whole conversation was, don't bring an agenda to a family meeting that you're not ready to let a kid have a full vote on. I wish I had known that 18 years ago. That's a really good one. We talked a little bit, and Yvette, thank you for your contribution about how stories kind of get into the DNA of the kids and what we can do to control that. I want to thank each and every one of you, of course, for being here. It's been another really, really gratifying conversation for me. And I think that we've really offered some good oversight and some good strategies for how we can sort of shift that around. If we were to do a second chat with this group of people, what I would go into at that time was a little bit more on trying to build relationships with the teachers in the schools. I will say this as a sort of a sign off. I'm not sure that it's possible en masse using public schools to really get that, because I believe that they're just too taxed. There's too many things in the way of the purity of educating children, et cetera, et cetera. That's my sort of unapologetic view on that. So Debbie, Jackie, Tom, and Yvette, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope this was as good for you guys as it was for me, and I hope that people watching got a lot out of this. And that's your cue to sign off.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Very
Lovely
much.
to meet you all.